Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, a single-player, story-driven Star Wars game, the kind of game that Electronic Arts has seemed resistant to publishing for years, has sold well enough to the point that the publisher is now boasting about it. Now, this of course does not mean that Electronic Arts won't tell its shareholders later that Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order sold below expectations. This industry has a widely documented history of promising the moon and being upset when they don't get it, but it's nonetheless encouraging to see, and it's almost as if there was a massive gap in the market that the game industry itself caused. A massive gap in the market that Electronic Arts itself caused, and the moment something came along to fill that massive gap, an entire demographic of customers that had been willfully ignored for years were plenty happy to embrace it. This is what tends to happen. We've seen this with other games. We saw this with the horror revival last generation. We saw it with strategy games like XCOM. We see it with Pokemon. We see it with Pokemon Sword and Shield. There are a lot of classic gameplay experiences, ones outside of the latest gravy train, the latest genre gold rush, for which the audience is completely undercatered. So then something comes along, something that does throw a bone to those undercatered people, and we find out that market never went away. There are loads of people waiting for games exactly like Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. But because it isn't a live service designed to cynically swindle as much money as possible out of the audience with a threadbare game and endless scads of monetization, we've had to wait roughly 6 years for Electronic Arts to publish a game like Fallen Order. EA got the exclusive rights in 2013 and for the vast majority of the time seemingly didn't know what to do with Star Wars. There have been project cancellations, Visceral Games got shut down in the middle of it while it was working on a game, EA seemed indecisive about what it wanted to publish, projects were pivoted. The best releases we've had so far have been the 2 Battlefront games, and each one had its own set of unique fuck-up problems. But anyway, Electronic Arts, with a little help from Respawn Entertainment, has put out a strongly story-driven game with its own firm identity, and it appears to have paid off. So they got this press release found on Business Wire, "The force is strong with Star Wars Jedi..." Oh God. Now, because it's a corporation and they gotta make everything sound momentous like it's the biggest thing in history, they've gone with a rather spurious record for Fallen Order to break. In the first 2 weeks, EA achieves fastest selling digital launch for a Star Wars game ever, becomes EA's top selling Star Wars title on PC in its initial launch window. That's a lot of modifiers they've added to that record. I mean, how many digital game launches has the Star Wars license had? Not that many. And using 2 weeks as the time period seems a little bit arbitrary. Now, I'm not saying that to disparage any success Jedi Fallen Order might have, but this is the kind of bollocks talk that game publishers routinely engage in to make their successes seem earth-shattering, certainly more earth-shattering than they actually are. This boast on Electronic Arts' part doesn't actually tell us much, not without any actual sales figures to back it up. And like I say, that's not to disparage the success, that's just to cut through all the corporate bollocks speak to recalibrate one's expectations. This is the kind of boasting that leads to video games selling below expectations, because they want to oversell and overhype everything. Now, I'm covering this not because Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is the best-selling PC digital launch title ever in 2 weeks ever. I'm covering it because no matter what happens, no matter if they come back later and say it was a disappointment, it's clearly selling well enough for them to do a press release about it. No, we do not have figures. No, we do not know enough about the sales to be fully impressed by this record, but it is clear it's doing well. And that, generally speaking, is good news. I say generally speaking because there is a tiny point of bitterness about EA being rewarded financially for doing something it should have done years ago, but instead, for the longest time, it tried to turn Star Wars into a perpetual money-making cash cow, engaging in some frankly disgusting business practices in the attempt. But this is certainly good news for Respawn Entertainment, a very talented developer that really got fucked over on the Titanfall license, especially with Titanfall 2, that seemed only half-heartedly supported by EA, even though it was really fucking good. And while they had mega success with Apex Legends, it's still good to see that Respawn is still able to craft a strong narratively led campaign and see some reward there. Now personally, I thought Jedi Fallen Order was pretty good. It was fine. It didn't blow me away, it's got quite a few caveats attached to it, but it did go some way towards scratching that itch for a story-driven single-player Star Wars game. The kind that I always said would sell pretty well. Because it's Star Wars at the end of the day. First of all, being Star Wars, it's gonna have a minimum baseline guarantee of success. But secondly, it's entirely fucking story-driven. That's the point of it. Yes, there are laser sword fights and gun pew-pew sequences, but people give a shit about that franchise because of the characters, because of the narrative, because of the sci-fi fairy tale elements, because of the sense of adventure. Now there's nothing inherently wrong with the Star Wars Battlefront formula, but EA focused on that to the exclusion of everything else for the longest time, and that was shameful. So like I say, who knows if a few weeks or months down the line whether EA will claim that Fallen Order sold below expectations. But right here the news is good. And that's good. I've got some good news for you today, huh? This is good news, basically, with some disclaimers, but, you know, it's not all doom and gloom, it just mostly is.